In this lesson, we're going to build the fan casing for our VTOL. Alright, so in the last lesson we had built out the wings, and now we're ready to build the fans that are connected to the wings here. So we're going to go to our top view by hitting T on the keyboard, and then we're going to drag out a cylinder to fit inside of our wing. So let's go to the Create panel, make sure you're under Geometry, Standard Primitives, and let's use a cylinder. So let's go ahead and drag out this cylinder here, and then we're going to just drag up a height there so that way we actually get an object here. So just like a box, the cylinder is a two-click process. So you drag out the radius, you release the mouse, and then you just move your mouse up and down to get that height, and then you'll click one more time to finalize that. So just to kind of show you that process really quickly, click and drag the radius, release, and then drag your mouse to get the height that you desire, and then left click one more time to finalize that height. I'm going to go ahead and delete that cylinder and then right click to end the cylinder creation process. Let's go ahead and position this in our top view a little bit better, and we want to give ourselves just a little bit of a gap in between the edges of the wing here. So I'm going to go to my modify panel, and I'm going to go down to 15, and the gap is pretty large there. It's a little bit, might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to take this to like 15.25 because we were at 15.5 before and I was touching, and I think that's pretty good there. Alright, so let's go ahead and convert this to editable poly. And looking at our cylinder, I didn't really pay much attention to the height on that. I think that might be just a little thick there. So let's go ahead and talk about how we can modify our geometry, the actual segments, to fit our needs if we've already converted something over to an editable poly like this. Well, what we can do, let's say that I don't necessarily need all of these segments, so I'm going to go to Edge Mode, and I'm going to double click on this edge, and that will select that loop. Now a loop is a set of edges that are connected end to end, okay? And they run continuously until they meet a point that it's not necessarily certain of which way is the loop, okay? So an example of that would be if we had another edge kind of coming off in this direction, and we had one going out and then one off in this direction, it would come to this point here and stop, okay, because it's not necessarily certain if it should keep going through or if it should follow a different path. It's kind of like getting to a fork in a road. It's not necessarily sure of which way to go, so it waits for your input. Now in this case, it's selected that entire loop, and we're just going to hit Control and Backspace, and this is not going to delete an edge segment. If we hit delete, notice what it does. It gets rid of any geometry along with that. So let's hit Control Z to undo that. We want to remove segments. Now this can be done by hitting the backspace. Now one thing that I want you to know by removing just the edges is if you go to vertex mode, you'll see that those vertices have been left, and these are isolated vertices, and we don't necessarily want polygons like this. Okay, so let's hit Control Z one time to get those segments back, and then we're going to go to Edge Mode. Let's hit Control and Backspace, and this will remove the edges and the vertices. So if we go to Vertex Mode, you'll see that those are no longer there. So we'll be using this technique quite often as needed, especially during optimization and cleanup. Okay, so let's continue to go through this process here. Double click here, Control Backspace, and Control Backspace here. Alright, so we have a pretty clean slate to work with right now. Now let's go ahead and get the casing that we need here. I want this casing to be hollow on the inside, so I need to create some polygons to allow that. So I'm going to go to Polygon Mode, select these polygons on the top and the bottom by holding Control and left clicking on those, and we're going to use the tool Inset to create the rim that we need to house those fan blades. So I'm going to go to something, let's go to 1.5 on that, and actually let's go to 2. Let's make that a little bit thicker there. I'm going to hit OK on this, and then I'm going to simply delete these polygons. So hit the delete key, and that will get rid of those. Alright, so now we have this empty space here, but you'll notice that it's not closed in, and that's going to pose a problem, especially if we render. We're going to be able to see through these back faces here. So let's go to border mode, because a border is a set of edges around an open polygon. So we can hit 3 on the keyboard to do that. Let's select this border along the bottom, and then hold Control and select the border along the top. And then what we can do is we can use bridge to cap that. Alright, so now we have what kind of looks like a tube. Now, just to show you really quickly, we could have gotten this same result by creating what's called a tube. Now, a tube is the same thing, it's just a different type of primitive. So if we drag out the radius and we release the left mouse button, you'll notice that we can get the inside radius. We'll click one time, and then we'll drag again to get the height of our casing. So you'll see that we've got the same exact result here. The reason that I showed you this is it's always important to remember that there are multiple ways to get a result when modeling. There's no just one simple trick to it all. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and just delete that. We've already created the casing that we need here. And I want to change the shape up on this a little bit. I don't want this to be just straight and kind of bland like this. I want to give it a little bit of a curve to it, because the wings have kind of this curve feature to them. So I'm going to come in here and let's go to edge mode, and I'm going to select this edge on the outside here, and we're going to hit ring, and then we're going to create 2 segments. Now you'll remember that we got rid of those segments before, but I always like to work with a blank slate first and then build up from there. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I find it very easy to add segments. So I'm going to go ahead and use pinch to spread these apart. Okay, and I'm going to hit OK on that. Now what I want to do is I want to scale these out just to kind of give it a little bit of a roundness. So if I use scale, and I scale out on the X and Y, and actually I can do all 3 directions if I want. If I scale out, you'll notice that this begins to kind of give me a rounded look to this. So I'm going to go ahead and go out of edge mode, and you'll notice that this no longer fits inside of the wings. So let's scale this object in all 3 directions, just so that way it fits inside of the wings again. Let's go ahead and grab our move tool and drag that up. Okay, let's continue to scale this. And I want the edges to go ahead and touch the wings here, because now what I can do is if I grab my rotate tool and I rotate this, you're going to notice that it's not really penetrating with the wing as much anymore. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Alright, now the problem with this is that the pivot point is along the bottom, and this is not going to work for the animator. What's going to happen is if the animator tries to move this fan blade, it's going to rotate from the bottom, and the pivot point should be somewhere in the wing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the pivot point and just get that ready for the animator. So let's actually move this up just a little bit more. Let's make it to where this edge right here touches the wing. Okay, and let's pull that back just a little bit. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my hierarchy panel, and inside here you're going to see that we can affect the pivot. And if we turn that on, this will allow us to move the pivot point to anywhere we want. Now we have a couple of alignment tools that allow us to center to the object itself, and we can align it to the object, or we can align the pivot to the world. I'm going to go ahead and center to object and then turn off affect pivot only, and now I can actually rotate along the center of this object now. Now that looks a little more natural. Okay, so very nice. Okay, so now that we've got this look, let's go ahead and smooth it out by using Turbo Smooth. And there we go. We're going to take our iterations up to 2 and isoline display. Let's go down to Editable Poly and Show End Result. And let's add in some segments just to tighten up some of these curves here. So I'm going to go right across the top here. So select this edge and hit ring, or hold shift and select the next edge in that ring. Now it should select all the way around, and we'll use connect. Let's go ahead and take that down to 1 segment, because I want this to be rounded out here. So I'm going to slide this in a negative direction. That should go up toward the top. There we go. And we need to do the same thing along this side. So I'm going to hold Shift, select that ring. Let's use Connect. And you'll see that that's along the bottom there. Let's go ahead and take our segments up to 2. Let's take the slide to 0, so that way it's pinching along the center. And then we'll spread it apart using pinch. We'll take that up to the edges. All right, we'll hit OK on that. That's looking pretty good. We also need one more segment right here across the bottom. So let's go ahead and just use the Swift Loop tool really quickly. So right here across the bottom there, and that should tighten that up. All right, very nice. So now we have this kind of fan casing that's kind of rounded off. If you want to make those edges harder around the center, by all means do so. It's your design. You could always try things out, so don't be afraid to do that. So again, if you want to kind of tighten that up, just right here across the bottom, you could do so just to make that a little flatter. You know, and I think I like that look a little bit better than just being completely rounded out. So I'm going to go with that. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to create the fan blades that would belong in the fan casing itself. And we'll get started with that next.